Welcome to CSS Breakdown, book by book, where today, in Season 04, Episode 14, we delve into Durant's Fallen Leaves to explore a fundamental human drive. Why are we so profoundly drawn to the opposite sex, and what does it reveal about our nature and our civilization? We're about to embark on a truly profound deep dive into the insights of Durant, one of history's most celebrated thinkers.
Absolutely.
And in his later years, captured in Fallen Leaves, Durant really turned his intellect inward, didn't he? Not just grand civilizations, but these deep personal questions.
Exactly. Away from the sweeping histories and more into, well, the meaning of life itself from his perspective.
And today, our focus is squarely on his captivating, sometimes pretty startling insights into human attraction, desire, all of that.
It's a fantastic opportunity, really, to get this wisdom from a mind that spent decades dissecting the human story.
So what's our mission here exactly?
Well, our mission in this deep dive is to really extract the essence of Durant's thoughts on attraction. We're not just going to skim the surface.
Okay.
We want to get into the evolutionary roots he talks about, unpack the societal implications, which are sometimes quite surprising, and, understand how this primal drive weaves itself into everything.
Like art. Civilization itself.
Precisely, from art to civilization. Think of this as maybe your shortcut to understanding a topic that seems simple on the surface.
Right, sex attraction seems basic.
But Durant shows just how complex it is, how it's rooted in biology, sure, but also profoundly shaped by culture.
And Fallen Leaves gives us that personal window, right, through the lens of his age and his honesty.
Yeah, that weary honesty of age. It's quite powerful.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Where do we start with Durant's reflections? Well, we kick off with something remarkably personal, almost disarmingly so, especially for a historian of his, stature.
Right.
He opens his thoughts on sex by expressing this genuine bewilderment, a kind of lingering curiosity, even late in life.
What was he curious about?
He wonders why he's still, and this is his quote, almost as sensitive to feminine charms in old age as he was way back as a student.
Wow, even after all that time.
Yeah, he casts his mind back 60 years to his days in a Jesuit college, remembering how he'd occasionally steal away to see a burlesque show.
You can just picture it, the venerable historian admitting this.
Exactly. The intellectual giant still acknowledging this persistent pull, attractions that stirred him way back in his youth. It's not just some academic note.
No, it feels lived, like a lifelong sensitivity that genuinely puzzled him.
Suggesting a force within us that maybe time and knowledge don't really erase.
And what's fascinating is how quickly he adds nuance to that. He's very careful to distinguish between what he calls an aesthetic emotion.
Okay, what's that?
Like a pure appreciation of beauty, something that he thinks presumes a certain distance.
Yeah.
Versus, conscious desire.
Oh, so like admiring a sunset without wanting to own the sun, that kind of thing.
Sort of, yeah. He's trying to intellectualize it, categorize it, say, I can appreciate beauty objectively. But then with this remarkable candor, he admits that distinction is pretty fragile.
How so?
He confesses that if these entrancing females made the slightest advance, he'd be, and this is him again, hard put to maintain the virginity of his thoughts.
Wow. Okay, so the intellectual barrier isn't foolproof.
Not at all. And he's not saying it's a personal failing. It's more like an acknowledgement of the sheer power of this drive.
The primal force.
Exactly. Our intellect can analyze, sure, but attraction can sometimes just overwhelm even a really disciplined mind.
So the key insight there is that our rational mind is often wrestling with these deep, almost automatic biological responses.
Yeah, it highlights the limits of pure intellect against these primal urges. It's a constant tension.
So even for someone like Durant, this force is powerful. What does that suggest about its universality?
Well, it leads him right into that broader question about human nature itself.
Okay.
He observes that most men will react almost by acquired reflex to any sexual stimulus. It's not just his own experience anymore.
He sees it everywhere as a predictable human thing.
Yeah, and he uses this really provocative term for us, Pavlovian automata.
Oof. That's strong. Like we're just responding to bells ringing.
It is strong and intentionally unsettling, I think. He's not just observing. He's expressing this deep wonderment, almost to kind of unease.
About why? Where? Why are we like this?
Exactly. Why we are such Pavlovian automata. That question really sets up the rest of his exploration in this part of the book.
He wants to peel back the layers, find the roots of these automatic responses.
Right. Are we just wired this way biologically? Is it culture? Or more likely some complex mix of both?
And it makes you think, doesn't it, about your own reactions or things you see.
Totally. How certain things just trigger immediate, almost involuntary responses in people, yourself included sometimes.
Yeah.
Durant's digging into that raw, maybe unthinking part of our nature.
The takeaway from this opening is his deep curiosity about how predictable we are sexually and questioning how much real control we have.
Precisely. It challenges our sense of autonomy right from the start.
Okay, so that question about our wiring leads into a really interesting theory about why certain things attract us. He suggests physical attraction might largely be due to, well, concealment.
Concealment, like hiding things, that seems counterintuitive.
It does, right. The idea that what we don't see is maybe even more powerful than what we do.
How does he explain that?
He gives a very specific example. He asks, would the female bosom be an erotic spur if, as an old Bali, it had been perpetually exposed to male view?
That's a good question. Constant exposure might make it mundane.
That's his logic. He says concealment makes every revelation a thrilling gift.
Okay. The forbidden, the hinted at, the glimpse. That's what sparks curiosity and then desire.
Exactly. It's not just visual. It's the psychological anticipation. Your imagination fills in the gaps.
And what's really insightful there is how Durant observes that women, through history, seem to have figured this out. He calls it their superior knowledge of sexual psychology.
So they understand this concealment principle intuitively.
He suggests they do, that they've concluded that partial veiling is better than none or all.
So not total exposure, not total hiding, but something in between.
Right, and he sees it as strategic, not just about modesty, it's about understanding psychology.
How does that work psychologically?
Well, he says by partially concealing, they allow male fancy to run wild, to idealize those lovely protuberances.
Idealize them.
Yeah, and crucially, this is interesting, to absolve them from all dependency upon time.
Whoa. Explain that.
Think about it. If something is partially hidden, your imagination can perfect it. It's not bound by the reality, the imperfections, the aging that full exposure might show.
So the mind creates this timeless, perfect image.
Exactly. The key insight is that attraction isn't just about what's physically there, it's heavily influenced by what's withheld.
Allowing the mind to project its own idealized version onto
This
it.
creates a kind of mythical allure, something constant revelation might actually kill. It highlights how much psychological projection fuels desire.
That's a really powerful point about the mind's role and this idea of mental construction. It leads him to something even more provocative. Durant introduces this idea that a big part of our agitation about sex might be less about biology or concealment.
And more about what?
More about something we learn. Indoctrination, he calls it.
Indoctrination, like we're taught to feel desire. That really challenges our basic assumptions.
It absolutely does. And this is where he brings in La Rochefoucauld, the French moralist.
Yes. What's the connection?
He recalls La Rochefoucauld's question, which is just profound. Would anyone fall in love if he had never heard or read about such a delirium?
Wow. Okay. So is love itself a cultural invention, something we learn about from stories, poems, movies?
That's the implication. If our whole understanding of passion, romance, eroticism is shaped by the culture around us, the stories, the songs, the societal norms we absorb constantly.
Then how much of what feels like innate desire is actually a learned response, conditioned by culture?
Exactly. How much of that delirium of love, the intense emotions, is actually sort of prescribed by our collective imagination, fed to us through media tradition.
It makes you stop and think, doesn't it? When you feel attraction or love, can you really separate the pure emotion from what you've learned love should feel like?
It's almost impossible to untangle.
Yeah. It suggests maybe those Pavlovian responses aren't purely biological reflexes after all. Maybe they're deeply conditioned by the symbolic world we live in.
Turning instinct into something much more elaborate, more culturally specific.
Right. So the core takeaway here is Durant's really provocative idea that our passionate experiences might be more shaped by cultural conditioning and learned narratives than we usually admit.
Blurring that line between nature and nurture in our most intimate feelings.
Definitely gives you something to chew on.
It really does. Okay, so after exploring concealment and this idea of indoctrination, Durant then pivots. He moves towards what many people would consider the sort of ultimate explanation.
Evolution.
Exactly. Evolution. He explains that from that perspective, it's pretty straightforward, almost brutal logic.
How does he frame it?
He says those organisms with the strongest urge to mingle their seed bread most abundantly Simple, natural selection.
Makes sense. The ones most driven to reproduce reproduced most.
And over countless generations, that relentless pressure meant the sexual instinct just grew and grew in intensity until it was surpassed only in the quest for food. So only the absolute immediate need for survival, for eating, trumps the drive to reproduce in this evolutionary view.
A clear hierarchy of needs dictated by the engine of life itself.
Yeah, and he has this incredibly vivid example to illustrate that hierarchy.
What is it?
He says, to a starving man, Aphrodite might not appear as a paragon of beauty, but only as a potential feast.
Ooh, stark, but it makes the point powerfully. Immediate survival versus sexual desire.
Absolutely. Life-threatening hunger takes precedence. It's primal.
But then Durant immediately connects this back to the modern world, right? What happens when hunger isn't the main issue?
Right. He notes that when the basic quest has been satisfied, and man can turn his thoughts away from food and money, his soul lies open to all the lure and tyranny of sex.
The tyranny of sex. Interesting word choice.
It is, and he points directly to contemporary societies, America, England, Germany, France, in his time saying, these nations that have come closest to solving the problem of hunger are also those in which sex is most rampantly and irresponsibly free.
So he's suggesting a direct link. Affluence and security lead to less restraint.
That's the implication. By reducing the constant pressure of basic survival, material security paradoxically allows the sexual instinct more room to roam, maybe even chaotically. The need for food isn't acting as that dominant brake anymore.
That's a pretty provocative sociobiological observation for his time, and probably still relevant.
Definitely. So if eating is primary, but then gives way to sex once we're basically secure,
Right.
what does that tell us about nature's, ultimate goal?
Well, this is where Durant makes this really powerful, almost chilling statement. He says, nature, i.e. here, the evolutionary process, is mad about reproduction.
Not just interested, but mad about it, like an obsession.
Exactly. The singular purpose, from nature's perspective, is continuing the species.
And where does that leave the individual? Us.
Well, from this cold, detached view, the individual human is just a tool and moment in the continuance of the species.
A tool and a moment.
Yeah.
Expendable vessels, basically. Transient vehicles for life itself.
It definitely strips away our sense of individual importance, doesn't it? It's quite humbling, or maybe even bleak, depending on how you look at it.
So this perspective is challenging. Nature's focus is incredibly narrow.
Almost ruthless. She cares little about anything but eating and begetting, Durant says.
And this is where his analysis gets really stark, especially about human culture.
Yeah, what does he say about art, literature, music in this context?
This is the kicker. He concludes that all our literature, art, and music mean nothing to her except as stimulation or ornament to sex and continuity.
Nothing, just ornaments for reproduction. That's deeply disturbing to think about.
It is. Think about every masterpiece, every symphony, every profound philosophy. From nature's cold evolutionary viewpoint, they're just elaborate decorations.
Sophisticated courtship displays, maybe?
Yeah.
Ways to stimulate the main goal?
That's the idea. It's an almost brutal assessment. Are our highest achievements just byproducts of primal drives? Or is there something more?
Durant, at least in this evolutionary passage, seems to lean towards the former. A powerful, maybe uncomfortable reminder of our biological roots.
And nature's relentless, single-minded agenda.
Yeah, the core takeaway is this starkly reductionist view of human culture that even our most celebrated achievements are ultimately subservient to the reproductive imperative.
Wow. Okay, and if that wasn't stark enough, he takes it even further with the role of eating.
How so? We established eating is primary for survival.
Yes, it's primarily necessary for life, but he argues it's ultimately subordinate to sex in nature's grand design. It's a subtle but crucial distinction.
Okay, how does he argue that?
He breaks down eating's purpose into two stages, from nature's perspective. It's quite chilling.
All right, stage one.
First, we eat to preserve and develop us for biological maturity, i.e. the ability to reproduce. So our entire youth, our growth, our health, it's all just preparation, getting us ready to pass on genes.
Preparation for the main event. Okay, stage two.
Then, once we've fulfilled that function, once we've reproduced, we continue to eat in order to survive as caretakers for our progeny.
So we live on to protect the next generation, ensure our genetic legacy survives.
Exactly. Not for our own sake, not for individual fulfillment, but to ensure the kids make it.
And here's the really stark implication he draws from this.
Go on.
He says, when we have completed both of these functions, nature has no further use or regard for us. Normally, we would soon thereafter die.
Whoa. So once we've reproduced and raised the young, biologically speaking, our job is done. Nature just loses interest.
That's his cold, hard biological take. Our utility to the species diminishes drastically. That fundamentally reframes the purpose of human life from a purely evolutionary standpoint, reduces us to a biological function.
It really does. The key insight is this profoundly utilitarian view of individual life. Our purpose is solely defined by reproduction and species continuity.
It's a tough perspective to swallow.
Definitely. So given this incredibly powerful, almost overwhelming, relentless sexual urge, this force driving us and maybe even our culture.
It makes sense that societies would try to manage it, right?
Exactly. It's no surprise that human societies throughout history have consistently tried to rein it in. Durant keenly observes this.
How does he put it?
He says that past civilizations have labored by might and myth to build dams against that swelling surge.
Dams against a swelling surge, like comparing it to a flood.
Yeah, implying it's this potentially destructive force that could just overwhelm social order if it wasn't channeled somehow.
That phrasing really captures the perceived power and potential chaos of it.
And it raises that question of the constant struggle, doesn't it? Balancing individual desire with collective stability.
Absolutely. Think about all the rules, the rituals, the religious codes, the moral frameworks around sex in different cultures.
Purity codes, marriage customs.
All of those, in a way, are these dams trying to manage this powerful, potentially dangerous force.
It's not a new problem. It's fundamental to human history, trying to figure this out.
A testament to the instinct's sheer power. So the core insight is that civilization itself is partly defined by these ongoing efforts to control and channel sexual energy, recognizing its potential for both creation and chaos.
And of all those dams societies have built, one really stands out as the main one, doesn't it?
Marriage.
Marriage. Durant sees it very pragmatically, as a primary device to control the flow of that stream. A societal mechanism, first and foremost.
Right. And he points out how it takes wildly different forms across cultures, but serves a similar function.
Like contrasting monogamy in Christendom.
One partner, exclusively bound.
With polygamy or even concubinage, allowed in
what?
parts of Asia and Africa in his time.
Very different structures, but the underlying goal is regulation, channeling sexual expression and family formation.
That's his view. Regardless of the specific social or religious wrapper, the basic function is to harness that powerful drive within a stable, socially acceptable framework.
Ensuring lineage, property, harmony, that kind of thing.
The collective effort to sort of domesticate this wild instinct for the good of the community, the family.
So the takeaway is his practical, almost sociological view of marriage as a key societal tool for managing the sexual instinct.
But Durant, writing later in life, was also seeing changes. He noticed cracks appearing in that ancient societal dike, especially in his own time.
He expressed concern about the state of marriage then.
Yeah, particularly in what he calls some Christian societies. He felt it was weakening.
How did he put it?
He says, in some Christian societies, marriage is failing as such a dike. He saw its historical role as a controlling mechanism starting to falter, maybe unable to contain the push for individual desires.
Reflecting those shifts towards more personal freedom, more autonomy that were happening.
I think so. And he voices this real uncertainty about where things are headed. He says, there is no telling whether Christian matrimony will be able to withstand the demands of the sexual instinct for greater freedom and wider variations.
So he wasn't judging it necessarily, just observing a trend, asking if the institution could hold up.
Exactly. It's a keen observation of a historical shift and a big question about the future of a core institution.
And that connects directly to the debates and changes we're still grappling with today, right? Relationships, autonomy, evolving morals.
Absolutely. His uncertainty feels even more relevant now, maybe.
The key insight being his prescient observation of that growing strain on traditional marriage, questioning if it could contain the rising tide of demands for sexual freedom.
Makes you wonder what new dikes or freedoms are emerging now.
Indeed.
Okay, so we've covered the primal drive, nature's focus, societal controls, the challenges to those controls. It could all sound pretty negative about the sexual instinct.
Like it's just a problem to be managed.
Right. But Durant isn't just a Puritan or detached observer here. He actually shifts to appreciating it. He makes this powerful statement.
What does he say?
I am not sure that I would want our sexual sensitivity to be reduced, for it is half the zest of life.
Half the zest of life. That's a significant shift.
It totally is. It reveals this really nuanced perspective. It's not just about control or biology. It's about the richness, the energy, the joy this sensitivity brings to being human.
So not just a problem, but a vital source of engagement with the world.
Exactly. And this is where he makes this profound, almost radical connection between sexual sensibility and, well, beauty and art.
How does he connect those?
He doesn't just hint at it. He postulates probably our sense of beauty is an offshoot of that sensibility.
Wow. Our whole sense of beauty stemming from sexual sensitivity, that's huge.
Think about it. Appreciating a landscape, a flower.
Hmm.
Could the root of that capacity trace back to the aesthetic power of the human form, especially in attraction?
That's a wild idea. Does he elaborate?
He does. He suggests that all other forms of beauty seem to be derived from the beauty of woman as the object of male desire and female envy.
Okay, that's a very bold, maybe even reductionist claim, placing the female form in that context as the prime model for all beauty.
It's definitely provocative. And he offers a parallel for the sublime, that feeling of awe or grandeur.
What's the source of that, in his view?
He says perhaps the sense of sublimity has its primary source in female and male admiration of virile strength.
So beauty from the female form, sublimity from male strength. It's a very gendered, biologically rooted view of aesthetics.
It is, but it provides this deeply rooted, almost visceral perspective on where art, architecture, music, all aesthetic appreciation might ultimately come from.
Suggesting our highest artistic impulses aren't just out there, but are intimately tied to our most primal responses. Attraction, power, the human body.
Yeah, the key insight is this really challenging theory. Our entire aesthetic sense, the very foundation of art, might be direct extensions of our basic sexual sensitivity, linking the sensual directly to the sublime.
That's a perspective that could change how you look at a lot of art history.
Absolutely. And building right on that, Durant gives this powerful warning about the danger of suppressing this fundamental part of us too much.
Okay, what's the warning?
He concludes this section saying, to condemn sexual sensitivity would be to outlaw aesthetic feeling and response, and so to cut the richest roots of art.
Wow. So trying to stamp out sexual sensitivity could actually kill art, kill our ability to feel beauty.
That's the implication. It underscores this idea that if you try to overly curb or demonize this instinct, you risk impoverishing human culture itself, stripping it of its vitality, its creative force.
It's a delicate balance then. Manage the force without destroying its life-giving, culture-generating side.
Precisely. It's a crucial warning against being too repressive, if beauty and art really are tied to this sensitivity.
Then a society that becomes too prudish or fearful might just dry up, culturally speaking, an aesthetic barrenness.
That seems to be his concern. It's not about advocating license, but recognizing this intrinsic valuable link between an instinct we often view suspiciously.
And some of our most cherished human achievements.
Right. The core insight is that suppressing sexual sensitivity has a steep cultural cost. It could sever the very roots of art and beauty.
Okay, so if total condemnation isn't the answer and complete freedom has its own problems, what is Durant's solution? How do we navigate this?
He introduces what he rather amusingly calls his overburdened panacea.
His go-to solution.
Yeah, the development of intelligence.
Ah, intelligence. How does that help here?
Well, he frames the whole challenge as finding a pleasant medium between castration and erotic mania.
Between total suppression and uncontrolled desire, the two extremes.
Exactly. And intelligence for him is the key to finding that middle path, that balance.
And what does intelligence mean in this context? Is it just being smart?
No, it's more holistic than that, not just raw intellect. It's about an enlightened approach to managing ourselves and living in society.
Okay, how does he describe that?
He details his vision. If we educate the body to health and the mind to a tempering harmony of instincts with reason.
Tempering harmony. So not denying instinct, not letting reason crush it, but integrating them, using reason as a guide.
Precisely. And the goal, he says, is to retain the stimulus of sexual feeling, keep that zest for life, while keeping it within bounds by a decent respect for public order and a prudent foresight of our own good.
So it involves self-awareness, personal responsibility, considering others, thinking ahead.
Yes, self-governance guided by understanding, not just forced by external rules or internal repression.
The key insight, then, is Durant's belief that intelligence understood as this cultivated harmony between instinct and reason is the only real way to manage the sexual drive sustainably, for both personal happiness and social well-being.
Suggesting true freedom isn't no boundaries, but intelligently chosen boundaries, both inside and out.
Right, makes sense.
And he doesn't just leave it abstract. He gives a very practical, very relatable example of how this balance can work in real life, in relationships.
Oh yeah, what's the example?
He states, pretty matter-of-factly, that it is quite possible to admire 100 women or men while remaining resolutely faithful to one.
Ah, so you can acknowledge attraction, appreciate beauty in many people.
Without acting on it, without betraying a commitment.
Exactly. It's not about denying the natural human tendency to notice or admire. It's about making a conscious, intelligent choice about where you direct your deeper affections and actions.
And he argues this approach offers, well, the best of both boons.
The best of both. What are they?
You get the transient ardor of sexual emotion, that spark, that appreciation for beauty that keeps life interesting, and the quiet content of lasting love.
Ah, passion and stability, the thrill and the security.
It's a remarkable synthesis, isn't it? An intellectual pathway, he suggests, to having both, using reason to guide instinct, allowing us to enjoy the breadth of beauty while cultivating the depth of commitment.
For you, the listener, it offers this compelling model, navigating attraction in a way that respects both our desires and our capacity for enduring connection.
Yeah. The core takeaway is Durant's optimistic vision. Through cultivated intelligence, we can find a balance, enjoying aesthetic appreciation broadly while maintaining the deep fulfillment of faithful love.
Intelligence doesn't kill feeling. It channels and enriches it, leading to a more complete experience.
So, quite a journey we've taken. Through Will Durant's insights in Fallen Leaves on this powerful human drive.
Absolutely, from his own personal feelings in old age.
Right, that enduring sensitivity.
To these grand evolutionary explanations, nature's obsession with reproduction.
Seeing how this primal instinct shapes us, shapes society, shapes marriage, even shapes art and culture at their very roots.
He definitely challenges us to see ourselves as these Pavlovian automata,
Driven by ancient instincts.
but also as intelligent beings capable of finding that harmony, that temperance through reason.
Finding balance amidst these powerful forces.
Which leads us, I think, to a final provocative thought, something for you to mull over after this deep dive.
Okay, what is it?
Well, if Durant is right, or even partly right, if our deepest sense of beauty, our aesthetic appreciation, maybe even the very foundations of art and culture really do stem directly from our sexual sensitivity, then what's the ultimate cost? The unforeseen consequence to a civilization that tries too hard to suppress or ignore that drive? What richness do we lose?
That's a big question.
And the flip side. In our world today, with unprecedented freedom, constant stimulation, how does a society effectively nurture that temperance of instincts with reason?
How do we achieve both that deep personal fulfillment and the public order needed to function?
It's the age-old human challenge, isn't it? Finding that balance.
A question Durant's reflections make clear is just as relevant, maybe even more urgent now as it was in his time.